Boa tarde. A friend of mine told me to say that on Twitter. I don't know what it means. Could have been messing with me, I don't know. Thank you for coming to see my talk. It's great to be invited to come speak out here. Brought my girls, made a little vacation of the trip. Had a great time here in Lisbon. And this is a game I worked on. This is why I sometimes get invited to go speak in exotic cities. It's my 15 minutes of fame. About 15 years ago now, I was the technical director on the Spider-Man games that went along with the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi movies. And I had the opportunity to put a fairly large thumbprint of my own, have a fairly large influence on how the second game in particular turned out. The story was, when I joined the Spider-Man 1 team, I wasn't very happy with how the web-swinging gameplay worked. It was kind of like flying. You're just sort of like lazily bobbing through the air. The webs were sort of decorations, cosmetic. They just attached to the clouds or something, not clear. And so I wasn't satisfied. I wanted something that felt visceral. I wanted something where there was a game there, where there was a challenge. And I wanted something that felt realistic. It's hard to talk about realism when you're talking about superhero characters and the impossible things they do, but I imagined that if Spider-Man were real, his webs would not attach to clouds in the sky. So I spent late nights for a few weeks prototyping something different. I was too busy during the day with my technical director duties to work on my idea, but during the night I was able to prototype some stuff with some stock assets, and I put something together, and after a few weeks I was like, I think I had something ready to show the rest of the team. So I brought the rest of the audience in there, or rest of my coworkers into my office. I was like, check this out. And they mostly thought it sucked, to be honest. Yeah, I'd only worked on it for a few weeks, and there were these issues with it where, like, you'd touch a wall while you were swinging and you'd stick, and that would kill your momentum. It would be no fun. It was hard to control. It was pretty bad. So we talked about it, and we're like, you know what? It would be a disaster to try to implement, like, this fundamental change to the way our swinging works this far along in the existing project. So we tabled it for Spider-Man 1. And then when Spider-Man 2 rolled around, and they said, hey, Jamie, do you want to be technical director again? I said, yes, but if we can explore that gameplay mechanic that I wanted to do for Spider-Man 1. And they said, well, okay, I guess. And I managed to negotiate a nice 6-month period of time where my team could work on this. And with the time and with lots of help from the other guys on the team, we actually made it into something pretty cool that we got the green light to go ahead with and ship the actual final product with. The rest is kind of history. Like, up until last year, when the new Spider-Man game came out for PlayStation 4, this game was kind of considered the best Spider-Man game ever. So 15 years is a pretty good run for a piece of gameplay, for a game to sort of like to hold the crown. The new game is great, by the way. They were clearly influenced by Spider-Man 2, but they took it and went farther with it and did things that we couldn't do because our hardware couldn't handle it at the time. So where's the clicker? So a little after I got invited to come talk to you about Spider-Man and my old history, I got a new job. By the way, how many people here have actually played Spider-Man 2? Oh, awesome. Really? Did you guys, I figured most of you would be too young. Did you play it on an emulator, or did you play it on an original console? How many played it on an emulator? Oh, all original consoles. Awesome, that's great. Okay, how many people have played this? This is where I work now. Yeah, I figured it would be more. So Spider-Man 2, I can't believe so many of you have played it. Like, it sold a few million copies, which I thought was a huge deal at the time, but actually in sort of the grand scheme of things, not that many. It's not the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, everybody's played it. Minecraft, on the other hand, it's hard to find somebody who hasn't played it or has a kid who hasn't played it. Spider-Man 2 sold what, 3 million units? Minecraft is at least 300 million. So I'm thinking, well, what will I talk about? Like now I'm working on Minecraft. Maybe I can talk about the differences I've discovered. I took a pretty big break between my work at Treyarch on Spider-Man and working at Microsoft to do indie games. I was away from the corporate game development scene. I was writing in higher level languages, working on smaller projects, and then boom, I'm back into big team, corporate development, C++. Maybe I could talk about that. But I'm thinking about it and find myself telling stories about the old days, and I'm like, you know what? These guys are pretty young. So most of them are going to be still in school. Maybe some of them are interested in careers in the game industry. How many people are interested in careers in the game industry? Anybody? All right, a bunch. Good. I prepared the right talk. I'm going to talk about how my career in the games industry went, and maybe you guys can draw parallels. So the way I started was I had the right parents. So everybody go out and get the right parents. My parents, both PhDs in genetics from UC Berkeley, so nerd stuff was popular in my home growing up. And when I was 10, in 1980, let me set the stage here, very few kids owned their own computer. That was not a thing. I was one of, I think, 3 people in my elementary school who had a computer. My parents bought me this for my 10th birthday, a Commodore PET. Check out these stats. Yeah. Had a tape drive, so that was fun. You could program in BASIC with line numbers and go-tos. And had these weird square keys. Like this was good for a 10-year-old's tiny fingers, but nobody like over the age of 16, I think, could actually use these things. Who's this guy? Anybody know? This is Richard Garriott, aka Lord British, when he was very young. My parents, speaking of having the right parents, sent me to computer camp when I was in middle school, and Richard Garriott had just finished a game called Ultima, and was working on Ultima 2, and he was sort of the celebrity counselor, the guest celebrity at this camp. He taught me how to program text adventures. He taught a class on making text adventures on the Apple II. I moved up to the Apple II at this point. And he was my hero. I was like, wow, you can make games for a living? That is crazy. I want to do that. And so I did hobbyist game development for a while. But it was sort of on and off. And, in high school, I got interested in, girls and drinking and stuff like that, and went to college and majored in psychology, because that's what I was into at the time. But in college, I met these guys. That's Doan Koslu. This is Peter Ackerman after a champagne fight at a New Year's party. He doesn't drink, but he'll participate in the spraying the champagne part of it. After college, after I had my psych degree, I was like, what do I do now? Turns out these guys worked at a game company, and they knew I could code. I'd made a game or two in college that they had seen, and we'd worked together on some stuff. So they managed to talk the boss of a company called Mindcraft with a D, not an E, Mindcraft Software, into giving me a job. And so, boom, I was in the game industry, making money, $6 an hour. That, even adjusting for inflation, that was not very much back then. That does not compare to software engineer wages today. It was barely above minimum wage. That's the Mindcraft software logo. And I worked on we started working on DOS games for 16-bit IBM PC machines. And so the next step in my career was to learn stuff and work hard. I wasn't really old enough to ever program a machine that used punch cards, but programming a 16-bit processor machine in assembly language, because they'd already used up all the space they had for their C code, but we still had a little overlay buffer that we could swap assembly language modules in and out of that we programmed with. That was not easy. At the time, kind of took it for granted, but looking back, it's like, oh, how did I live? 16 bits, biggest number you can store conveniently, 65,535. That may sound like enough to do most things, but when you stop and think about it, there's more seconds in the day than that. If you do some math involving seconds in your game's going to have unpredictable behavior before the day is over. Never mind if imagine if you're counting frames instead of seconds. Then you only get a couple hours before a problem might accrue. So our code was filled with this. Every arithmetic operation we did, we had to check the overflow bit and handle that possible condition. I don't know. Can you imagine? Have any of you had to bother checking the overflow bit while doing computations? Nobody yet? How many engineers, by the way, in the audience? All right, good number. Yeah, I don't know. 30 years from now, maybe you'll be giving a talk on a stage somewhere, and you'll talk about what now seems like stuff we do today that now seems like, how did we live this way? How do we live without being able to, debug our network protocols or something? I don't know. How did we live with only 32 gigs of RAM? Okay, so Minecraft eventually went under, like most game companies do. Fortunately, I still had those same good friends, Don and Peter, and they decided they wanted to found their own game company. Does anybody recognize this logo? If anybody plays Call of Duty Black Ops, they probably recognize this logo. So they hired me as the first programmer at Treyarch Software. And that was when things started to really accelerate in the industry. We were right on a turning point when we founded Treyarch. They were working on one of the first three-dimensional video games, 3D video games. It was called Die by the Sword. When they started working on it, Quake was not out yet. Tomb Raider was not out yet. We were doing some pretty cutting-edge stuff, and they'd managed to secure some investment funding. They managed to secure some publisher funding from Interplay, and we were off to the races. So the game industry was changing hugely at this point in time. We went to 32-bit processors, which was a boon. Like, we didn't have to keep checking the overflow bit. But it took me a while to realize that we didn't have to keep checking the overflow bit. It took me a while to sort of do the math and figure out, wait a minute, we can store up to like 4 billion now. And there's only 30 million seconds in a year. This program can run for a long time before an overflow is an issue. Before that year is up, we're going to have much bigger issues than whether our timer overflows. We went from assembly to C to C++. Treyarch was an early adopter of STL. You talk to most game engineers. Who here knows what STL is, by the way? Are we all? Okay, so C++ has this. In the 1,200-page document that is the C++ reference manual of today, a lot of it is devoted to the standard template library. And when you talk to game programmers back in the 90s, in the late 90s, and they saw STL and they saw the code it generated, they were like, keep it away. Don't let that touch my game code. It's going to be so slow. But I personally, and here's another one of my career steps, I write slow code. I pride myself on writing slow code. In general, safety, security, maintainability, not having bugs is always sort of my first priority. Speed comes later when necessary. And there have been times I've painted myself into a corner with this. The loading times on one of our games was atrocious because of the way we were doing file loading, for example. But for the most part, I've been able to be very productive and get a lot of stuff done without that many bugs because of the way I prioritize things. And choosing to adopt STL early, back in the early days of Die by the Sword, was an example of that for the most part paid off. We used to, in the start with Treyarch and at Minecraft, we would share code on floppy disks. Called it SneakerNet because we're running around the office in our sneakers, handing disks to people. We have a whiteboard. It's like, I'm modifying this file, don't touch it. Source control became a thing, and by the time Treyarch was done, we'd gone from nothing to source safe to CVS to Perforce or a mixture of CVS and source safe to Perforce, and it was a lot to keep up with. A lot of game engineers washed out back then because making the transition from 2D graphics, where they're just transferring pixels from one memory buffer to another, to 3D graphics, where suddenly we all had to know linear algebra. That was a big jump for a lot of people. I did very well in linear algebra in college, so that's, if you're going to get into games, study your linear algebra. And we went from being single-player experiences to network experiences. And Die by the Sword was an 8-person team. Spider-Man 2 was an 80-person team. That's how rapidly things ramped up. Now, I mentioned that there were some places where I painted myself into a corner with my emphasis on being correct rather than being fast. There were other really bad decisions I made. After Die by the Sword was done, we were like, okay, Die by the Sword 2, kind of a no-brainer. And we just recently heard a talk by Michael Abrash. He said that John Carmack, everybody knows who John Carmack is, yeah? Yeah? The guy who made Doom and Quake, now works at Facebook. When he went from Doom to Quake, his philosophy was always start over. You know, throw away all that old crappy code now that you've learned your lessons, start over from a clean slate, write some new beautiful code with, unfettered by legacy code. And we heard that and we're like, yeah, John Carmack is a genius, so that must be the right thing to do. I strongly push, we got to throw away all our old crappy code. It was pretty crappy, by the way. We were, a lot of us were learning it as we went. Peter Ackman, the guy with the champagne on him, he was a mathematician. He wasn't really a programmer. He was learning C++ as we went. So we wanted that clean slate. But Interplay didn't want to do Die by the Sword 2. So what are we going to do? Turns out, this guy came back into the picture again. I sent his company a resume after I graduated college, before I ended up at Minecraft, and they never got back to me for some reason. They didn't, I guess, want a psych major with very little programming experience. Go figure. But now that we had Die by the Sword under our belts, and it was fairly popular amongst the coding and geek circles, they were like, hey, we got this franchise called Ultima with this Ultima Underworld sort of spin-off. Wouldn't it be also awesome if the new Ultima Underworld used the Die by the Sword engine, and we slap an Ultima Underworld coat of paint over it all, and call it Ultima Underworld 2 or 3 or whatever number they were up to. And we were like, yes, that sounds awesome. That's great. And here I am in the pitch meeting. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. We do need to rewrite our engine, though. And I watched the faces of all these sort of executives in this room sort of go from like being excited and pumped about making Ultima Underworld 3 to like, oh, you have to, why? Why do you have to rewrite your engine? And we're like, well, we made this bad decision and this bad decision. And they're like, oh, okay. And I didn't get invited to any more pitch meetings after that. Fortunately, I still had good friends, still had this guy. He talked to a smaller publisher called Crave, and they said, yeah, we would love to make a spiritual sequel to Die by the Sword. Can you do it in 9 months? And he said, sure. When he told us the new plan, I was furious. I was like, dude, games take 1.5 years to make. There's, studies have shown, people have been doing this for a while. We've seen the numbers. They take 1.5 years to make. and I turned out I was right. That 9-month game really did take us a year and a half before we finally shipped it. What was the alternative? Like, looking back, I think, what was the alternative? He could have said no. We could have ended up with no contract. We would either have to get a smaller contract with a different game and lay almost everybody off, or we had to, take the risk. And he kept the studio afloat, and he suffered. He got an ulcer during the production of the spiritual sequel to Die by the Sword, which was called Draconis, and it was for the Dreamcast. But at the end of the day, Treyarch stayed afloat, and we got to the point where we could do some good stuff. They made me the lead engineer on the Tony Hawk ports. We made these for the Dreamcast, and we aced it. I gotta say. Now, making a port is a lot easier than making an original game, so it's not that big a deal. But made some really good decisions. I started reading management books. Started reading Joel Spolsky. He's sort of he was a software engineering management guru online in the 90s. He invented Stack Overflow. And we did some clever things with source control. Source control was young back then. It's not like Git these days where it's kind of obvious how to do this thing. Back then it was like, how are we going to keep getting updates from Neversoft and their code base and patch them into the code base we're working on? How are we going to do that? We did something fairly similar to what you would do today in Git, but that wasn't like a first-class feature in the source control packages at the time. And I played the game a lot, so make sure there were no bugs in it. And because we did such a good job on these, Activision liked us, and they gave us the Spider-Man franchise to work on. There it is again, and things were looking good. And Spider-Man made tons of money, and Spider-Man 2 made tons of money, and it was time for the next phase in my career plan. I gave talks like at GDC, like this. I got invited to other exotic cities, Singapore, London. I kept a blog. It was called Game Dev Blog. I haven't been maintaining it that much lately. I wrote articles for Game Developer and Gamma Sutra. I got my name out there, and I sort of became known as the Spider-Man 2 guy for amongst that tiny subculture of who knows things, who knows that kind of things, and so I was ready for the next step in my career plan, which was to think I knew everything. It's like, yeah, I am a badass lead engineer. I'm going to quit my job at Treyarch. I'm going to start a new company that does things the right way, not my way. And so I quit Treyarch and went indie. And this was a great experience in some ways. Got to make a lot of games that I was very, very hands-on with, very much sort of my idea, my influence. But the downside is I never made much money. We were always just scratching by. I actually founded 2 studios since I quit Treyarch. First one with a friend. That one went under when we were chasing some publisher funding. Later on, I did it sort of all DIY. What can I do by myself? Just contracting out the art I need. Also, still, this way at least I can survive. I don't have other mouths to feed. But at the end of about a 15-year stint of trying to be an indie game developer, I said, you know what? It is time to call it quits on this. Not just because I wasn't making that much money, but also because it turns out I wasn't really enjoying it. And part of that was because I wasn't making much money, but part of it was because I realized something about myself, which is I like making games for me. When I have to make games that lots of other people like as well, that's not so fun. And I got lucky with Spider-Man 2 in that this really hard, esoteric, challenging game mechanic took off. And I'm certain that it would not have if it didn't have sort of Spider-Man pushing it. Like, people picked up that game and got over the 10, 15-minute learning curve because it was Spider-Man. They wouldn't have done it if it was like Joe grappling hook guy. So turns out when you're 50 and you have been doing indie games for a long time, it's not that easy to find a new software engineering job. I applied to a bunch of places, and I'd get to the interview stage pretty easily, and then I'd screw up the interview. I'd never interviewed before. Like, I got my Treyarch job because I had friends, right? I got every career job because I had friends. I never had to go through the loop, as they call it. So I had to learn how to interview. I had to read those books on how to do a coding interview. I had to get on to Leet Code and solve the algorithm problems, because the call for most of these algorithms that they teach us in school and that they ask us about in interviews, there isn't that high in game development. Actually, we need to know A* for pathfinding, but we don't really need to know what's a cool algorithm that I've never actually had to use. Tries, like we hardly ever use tries in game programming. And so, like the closest I got, like I did a really awesome interview at ArenaNet, the guys who make Guild Wars, and I was like, okay, I think I got this job. The very next day, I hear in the news that they're laying off a third of their workforce. It's like, oh. So, fortunately, when I was working on the Spider-Man games, a guy came in to interview for a design position, and he stayed in touch. It was really cool of him. Like, I'm pretty bad at staying in touch with people, but this guy, Max Slagor, stayed in touch. And he later on got a job elsewhere in the industry. He worked on Metroid games for Nintendo for a while, and then he ended up working in the Halo franchise. And so when I told him, hey, I'm looking for a job, he's like, hey, the Minecraft people work right below me. Let me talk to them and see what they've got. And so thanks to him, I finally landed a position. And I gotta say, I'm glad. Like all the places that I interviewed and didn't get jobs, like Amazon and Facebook, like they didn't quite feel right. At the time I really wanted the job because I didn't have anything, but this, now that I'm here, it feels like I landed in the right place. That said, it was with some trepidation that I'm jumping back into the world of corporate C++, big game development again. Like, things changed so much in the first 15 years of my career when we went from 16-bit to 32-bit processors and assembly to C++. Like, how much have things changed in the last 15 years? On the surface, not that much. Minecraft still supports 32-bit processors, ARM and stuff like that. We're still doing concurrent source control, still using C++. Minecraft people use STL a lot as game developers go, so even that's not that different from the way we were doing it before. But once I start digging in, things actually have changed quite a bit. We do also have 64-bit SKUs that we support. Minecraft runs on everything, so I'm surprised there aren't any 16-bit things that we try to port to. C++ has changed a ton. It's gone from, I don't know, a 600-page book to a 1,200-page book. We're not using Perforce. Perforce is super common in the games industry. Minecraft is one of the few places that uses Git. We get to get away with that because Minecraft doesn't have big binary assets. Git kind of sucks when you're dealing with like big textures, meshes, animations. Perforce is what you want for that. So I have to learn Git. That's an exercise. Git is its own strange beast. How many you all who here uses Git like knows it's yeah? Do you like it? I'm not going to have to deal with ray tracing. I'm on the network team at Minecraft, but most of my games in my past have been peer-to-peer netcode, and I didn't even do the full stack. Like I built on top of other services. I built my gameplay stuff on top of other services, and now here I am finding myself being the lead of a network team that that owns the full stack. So it's like now I've got to learn how to do all those weird things that somebody else dealt with me before. The UDP protocols and the NAT punching and stuff like that, all the way up to the high level. Multiple cores is a thing now, right? Spider-Man 2 was one of the last single-core AAA games. After Spider-Man 2, the Xbox 360 came out, the PlayStation 3 came out, and it suddenly became all about multi-core. Almost all games support multiple cores now. That's I've dabbled with that a bit with one of my games, but that was in C#, where you have some safety nets. Doing it in C++, it is very easy to hit your thumb with a hammer. And I don't even know how many people work on Minecraft. We've got people all over the world, contractors, full-time employees. It's insane. And that communication overhead of everybody, like just last week, it's like I find there's a bug in the code. I trace it to this one line of code. Turns out it's this guy in Stockholm who wrote that one line of code. He's now working on he's working on Minecraft Dungeons now. I'm like texting him, hey, why'd you do this? He's like, oh, it was a performance improvement. It was a 10% performance improvement in our network bandwidth. And I'm like, oh yeah, kind of was. I guess I can't just take that code out. So I've been drinking from the fire hose for the past 6 months, basically, trying to keep up and learn all this stuff. Fortunately, who here knows about fixed mindset and growth mindsets? Is this a new thing for you guys? Okay, so this is super awesome. This is going to be inspiring. So I'm definitely from a fixed mindset generation. Like when I was growing up, generally the attitude is like you either know how to do math or you don't. You either can figure out how to program or you can't. It turns out that's a super toxic attitude to have. It takes the wind out of your sails before you even get started. Somewhere around 2005, I think, a psychologist named Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, and she studied this phenomenon of how if people just believe that intelligence is not fixed, if mathematical skill is not fixed, if programming skill is not fixed, they will have much greater chance of success in life, and teams that promote this mindset will have a much greater chance of success than teams that believe in you're either good or you're not. And Treyarch was fixed mindset. Treyarch was like, and I was fixed mindset. I was like, okay, if you can't write some code to insert a node into a linked list, then we don't want to hire you. But that now I believe, no, that's something people can learn. There may be bad teachers who make it hard for people to learn how to insert a node into a linked list. Linked lists are pretty useless in general, but except for like interview questions. But there's sort of a good way to check if people can sort of handle a certain level of abstract thinking. That's why I liked linked list tests as an interviewer at Treyarch. But I'm tickled. I get to Minecraft, new employee orientation day, and the first thing they put up on the screen is growth mindset. Turns out Microsoft's new CEO, Satya Nadella, is big into the growth mindset thing, and he's made it part of his sort of personal mission to sort of instill this knowledge of growth mindset throughout the company. So it's like, yes, I'm at a place where I'm allowed to suck for a while before I get good. In the immortal words of Jake the dog, dude, sucking at something is just the first step to getting sort of good at something. So, yeah, I lied. This wasn't really a talk about how to get into the games industry. It was more just me telling you stories. I hope you were entertained. I will turn it over to you now. If you have any questions, ask me anything. Obrigado. And you can follow me on Twitter. I'm still maintaining one of my indie games as a side project. It's called Dungeon Life. It's on the Roblox platform. I'd love to have collaborators. It's open source now, and it's cool. It's a player versus player dungeon crawler where you take turns playing the monsters, keeping the heroes out of the dungeon, and the heroes trying to go into the dungeon. And every now and then, every couple months or so, I might put a blog post up on gamedevblog.com still. Yeah. Obrigado.
So, does anyone have questions?
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
I have two questions for you. The first question is about is more about plugin related questions.
Money related?
Plugin, Minecraft plugins.
Oh, okay.
So I was wondering if there are future plans to make plugins broader, in the sense that we can make more stuff, we can add more content to the game, just like mods in Minecraft do, without players having to install them to join servers.
How would you how would you define the difference between a plugin and a mod? I'm not. I will say that definitely it is part of our long-term roadmap to make content creators' lives easier and better. I did a bunch of Roblox development. Like, I was basically a content creator for Roblox, part of my indie career, and they have us beat right now in that area, in content creation, and we want to catch up and beat them. It'll take a while, but it's something we want to do. But go ahead.
That brings me hope. Then the other question is more of a curiosity question. And what do you think, what is your opinion about an upcoming game called Hytale?
I don't think I've heard of it.
You never, you never heard
Hytale?
of it? Hytale.
Hytale. I have heard of it, but I know very little about it, so
okay.
I don't really have an opinion.
It's a game that's being developed by Minecraft players.
Oh, okay.
And since, based on that fact, I think it would be interesting to hear the opinion of a developer of Minecraft.
I might be.
To know what they think about their players creating a game inspired in their own game, and trying to do something that will take on every good aspect of your game.
Yeah, in general, I think it's very hard for traditional game companies to compete with modders. Like, just because there's so many modders, and they can make things that we never thought of, that we'd never imagined were fun or popular, and suddenly auto chess becomes huge. And it's like, who saw that coming, right? Like, and things of that ilk. It's like, and we're saying, yeah, we're doing our scientific approach to game design. We're doing our A/B testing, and then Adopt Me appears on Roblox, and it's just like, oh, why even try?
Okay, thank you.
Hey, so great talk. I also have two questions. The first one is, you had not psychiatry, but psychology degree. Was that ever useful in your career? Did you find that?
In two ways. One is sort of a psychological behavioral approach to making games. Has always been a thing. I've always been a big fan of focus testing, seeing what people think when they're playing the game. With Dungeon Life, I did the full-on A/B testing, statistical analysis type stuff. Blew the dust off of my statistics class from 30 years ago, trying to figure out how to apply what I learned back then. And also, as a lead, it's been very useful. Just being interested in the squishy stuff, like fixed versus growth mindset research. Like, most engineers don't dig into that, but I did, and that has helped me be a better lead, all through my career.
Okay, great. My final question is, I think 4 of your steps were about having really good friends and relying on them. I'm not going to ask you how to make good friends. I'm going to ask you if you want to be my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Drop me a line on Twitter.
All right, Jake.
Or
Okay,
dig up
great.
my email.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't know. I got lucky, really, with friends. Like, I met the right people. They kept in touch. Yeah, it's like.
Okay, does anyone have another question? No?
First of all, it was a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one question. Give me a second. So, would you do it all over again? Like, you told us your story. What would you change?
What would I change? This is interesting. So, when Peter and Doan founded Treyarch, they originally asked me to be one of the co-founders, and I said no.
Why?
I said, I don't think this is going to work, guys. And this is sort of like when I talk about how Pete is a very positive guy. I'm the kind of programmer, who says that when I say that sounds optimistic, I mean it as an insult, right? And I realized, like, there are studies who show that positive attitudes you're more likely to succeed with, statistically more likely to succeed with, than negative attitudes. And I think, it's quite possible that if I had joined Treyarch as one of those founders and I was in that pitch meeting where they said, let's do Die by the Sword 2 in 9 months, I would have said, no way, and maybe killed the company. It's like, it may have been a good thing that I was not one of the founders.
Thank you. Also, about those 15 years, you're like astray as an indie developer. How do you feel about them?
So it definitely had some positive things. Like, I got to work from home a lot, so I got to spend time with my kids during their formative years, which was great. I wouldn't take it back. I wouldn't do it different again. Maybe I'd approach it with a different attitude. Mm-hmm. Maybe sort of recognize just how hard. Like, when I started, I was like, I just made Spider-Man 2. Like, this is going to be easy. Maybe I would have gone into it thinking, you know what, this is going to be a whole different sport from what I'm used to, and I'm going to have to get help and get mentoring and listen to a lot of feedback and work really hard.
Okay, thank you so much.
I have a question for you. So Minecraft has evolved a lot over the years. It's gone basically from a very small underground game to one of the more accessible and mainstream friendly games out there in the market. And my question is essentially how now, as a Mojang and Microsoft employer, how do you perceive the evolution of Minecraft over the years? And currently, how do you plan on keeping the game updated more into not just to please the new players that come into the game, but into the more veterans and who have stayed over the years with the game? I know that the game, that most of the old players don't really sometimes approve of the changes that have been made into the game over the years. So I would like to know your opinion regarding that.
Yeah, so questions like that are a bit above my pay grade. I really am pretty much just an engineer now.
Sorry.
If I'm going to channel the thought processes of the leads, and I also don't know exactly how much I'm allowed to say. For 10 years, we've been continually updating Minecraft, and mostly it's the team in Stockholm that drives that and sort of seems to magically know what people want, and has magically helped the game grow year after year, day after day. And we're going to keep on doing that. We've got updates planned almost every quarter. Like, we generally do 2 big updates a year, and then 2 sort of smaller, just let's get a little something in front of the players in the alternate quarters. So that process has worked really well for us so far, and don't see it stopping. But we go back to community and supporting our creators. The community is such a huge part of what makes Minecraft what it is. People who love their particular mods, or people who love their particular servers. Supporting that kind of growth has always been huge for us, and empowering creators to help us has been super mutually beneficial.
Okay, thank you very much for the answering. So the Q&A session's over. If you want to find Jamie, he'll be out there on our showcase area. A big round of applause for him.